And if that's okay.
Yes.
Carol nod. And if everybody else can mute themselves. All that moves on the earth. Well, I've confused Carol. Sorry. Carol, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, can you voice the bold type?
Yes. On mine, it's all that moves. Oh, me. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, that's the title. Okay.
All that moves, bless your God.
All that swims in the water.
Bless your God.
All that flies in the air.
Give glory to God who nurtures us all.
Parents and children.
Bless your God.
Friends and lovers.
Bless your God.
Musicians and sports folk.
Give glory to God
who nurtures us all. Parks and play areas.
Bless your God.
Streets and shops.
Bless your God.
Homes and gardens.
Give glory to God
Give glory to God who nurtures us all. Isaiah 66, who's got that? Somebody got Isaiah 66 to read?
Somebody volunteered.
Was a woman.
I've got, Paul, if you want me to do it.
Oh,
Starting with verse 12.
yes, through 14.
For this is what the Lord says. I will extend peace to her like a river, and the wealth of nations like a flooding stream. You will nurse and be carried on her arm and dangled on her knees. As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you, and you will be comforted over Jerusalem. When you see this, your heart will rejoice, and you will flourish like grass. The hand of the Lord will be made to his servants, but his fury will be shown to his foes.
Word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
We believe, God of all gods, that you are the eternal God of life.
We believe, O God of all peoples, that you are the eternal God of love.
We believe that you create earth and seas and skies.
We believe that you create us in your image and give us eternal worth.
We honor you with our whole being.
And consecrate this day to you.
Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 through 13.
I'll admit to that, Paul.
Go for it, Bill.
Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Is there anyone among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will you give him a snake? If you then, although you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? In everything, treat others as you would want them to treat you, for this fulfills the law and the prophets. Enter through the narrow gate, because the gate is wide and the way is spacious that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Hallelujah.
God, make whole the leisure and activity of this day. Restrain its hostile impulses. Fill its moments. Our Father in heaven, honored be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as
As in heaven.
in our pleasures,
Your kingdom come.
Come.
in our leaders,
Your kingdom come.
in our gatherings,
Your
Your
kingdom
kingdom
come.
come.
on the roads,
Your
Your
kingdom come.
on the
Kingdom
networks,
Your
Your
kingdom come.
in each thing we do this day,
Your kingdom come.
in places affected by extreme weather,
Your kingdom come.
in Florida and Carolinas, but also of Japan and the Philippines and the west coast of Alaska, and Pakistan, where a third of the country is underwater.
Your kingdom come.
kingdom come.
And the fires that are plaguing the world.
Yes.
Your kingdom come.
In Ukraine,
Amen.
Your
Your kingdom come.
And in Russia.
May your kingdom come quickly.
Yes. And all our actions
your kingdom
Kingdom come.
come.
All those dealing with the coronavirus.
Oh, your kingdom
Kingdom
come.
come.
For the political strife in our country and throughout the world.
Your
Your
kingdom
kingdom
come.
come.
Give us this day our daily
Daily
supply,
bread.
and forgive us our
Forgive us.
sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom,
Kingdom,
power,
Power and the
and the
glory
glory
are
are yours, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
may we do this day on earth.
As
As
the
the
saints
saints do in heaven,
in heaven.
May we live this day in your light.
And walk
in the
in the
hope
hope
of
of
the
the
kingdom.
Your
kingdom.
kingdom.
Amen.
Amen.
So, as David Letterman says, my next guest needs no introduction. Ray Simpson is our beloved founding guardian, author of many books, prophet, wise man, friend, and our guest this morning. And he's one who loves the United States, has visited here and Canada a number of times, as many of you know. When the first 5 of us took the long voyage of vows, Ray came at his own expense to be with us when we did that in Albuquerque 8 years ago. And he's also had extensive contacts with First Nations people in this country
Yes.
and around the world. And always is motivated to lead us not just into identity with the Celtic saints, but that in each place where the community is formed, we grow into a way of being of faith and being church and community that is authentic to the place where we are. And so his book entitled Brendan's Return Journey came out last year. Many of us have read it. And without any more, I will hand over to Ray. Thank you so much for being with us, my friend.
Thank you so much for facilitating this. And it's lovely to see so many veterans and newcomers. I think probably Tom was the first one I met more years ago than I can imagine. But I remember you driving me from Canada, where you were doing spiritual direction, to Seattle, where we were stopped on the way by the police, and they thought I said I wasn't going to earn any money. And they said, "Oh, but you're allowed to have lots of collections. We've got to suss you out to make sure that you're going to pay all your taxes." That was a lovely visit, and of course, when I went to Texas, where Emily is and Jessie is, I went to Jessie's church. They said, "Oh, it's only a small church." Before I left, I asked somebody to say, "What do I need to learn about Texas?" And they said, "Everything is big. The hats are big and the churches are big." I realized it was just 3,000 members of Fort Worth Methodist Church, which is rather one of the smaller churches, because there were two churches of 20,000 just down the road. But I preached at 3 or 4 of the 4 morning services, and but not at the French-speaking one, I'm glad to say. And of course, I was present at the US retreat at Santa Fe, hosted by Esther Marie when she was warden of the Catholic Retreat House there, beautifully hosted. It was a privilege to be there. And I recorded a rather annoyingly, because some other friends from other parts of the States were going to come, because I come 3 days early, and they come, and I said, "All right, well, I'll have to put that aside." And we recorded on Catholic radio, which has 100,000 listeners. The person producing it said this is the ecumenical slot. But anyway, the Archbishop banned it. But then I learned that he banned everything by the priest who lives in Albuquerque, who writes all these letters. You know perfectly well who I mean. Mm-hmm. And so I was in good company to be banned from that. And we shall never remember what I would have said. But when I was at Albuquerque, I met Will Toms, who some of you may have met. He started a mission with Youth with a Mission to the Hopi people of Arizona. And there's a YWAM mission base inside the reservation. And he told me that he'd been abused by his father, and he had a dream that he asked an Indian chief to be his father, and he came to know and love Jesus and to realize that he didn't have to follow Jesus through the imprisoning experiences of his abusive childhood. And that led him to serve the Native American Indians in Arizona. And he then told me that there was a new narrative, a new myth of the story of St. Brendan. Well, all you who study the Celtic tradition, of course, know the story of St. Brendan, who, according to the 8th century text of this 6th century man, got in a curragh, or we call it a coracle, but it wasn't really a coracle. But he went for 4,000 miles because he and many of his kindred were seeking a new Eden. Why did they seek a new Eden? By the way, this is the book. And, it's Brendan's Return Voyage, A New American Dream, Indigenous, Post-Colonial and Celtic Theology. And if you read it, whether you love it or hate it, would you do a review on Amazon? Because that's the best way to get things known. Well, anyway, he told me that Brendan had come on the voyage, and what they did, what some of those Celtic Christians did, they believed what the very early church fathers, Athanasius and Chrysostom, taught. When Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan, he came to restore fellowship between humans and the Creator, Adam, and between the creation and the Creator, Eden. And when Christianity got taken over by the imperial Roman system, has been the prisoner of colonial movements in Europe and America and most countries ever since. By and large, with some glorious exceptions, it forgot all about that. And it plundered the earth and made profit, cash profit, the god, and took it for granted that you didn't have to pay anything back to the earth. In other words, it was rape the earth in the name of Christ. Now, Brendan wasn't like that, but he travelled 4,000 miles. And the interesting thing is that a few years ago in 1970s, Tim Severum reconstructed the boat of Brendan and did the same journey. Well, he got all the way to Nova Scotia, actually, but it was more or less the same journey. It could be done in such a boat. But another book which I read imagined the journey and likened all sorts of places Brendan stopped at, where there was lava or icebergs and this, that, and the other, and itemized or identified the likely places. And he thinks that the last place was when he reached land. He realized that what is now the USA wasn't an island, it was a huge continent. And he then reached the Mississippi and he couldn't get across it. So they stopped at somewhere like Chesapeake Bay, do you call it? And there, the local inhabitants, Indians, welcomed them and gave them food. And Brendan, who was a very humble man, realized that his Jesus was already there. Because, as Vatican II documents today say, Christ can be likened to the sun, and rays of light come through many, many religions and ideas through the ages. Although the fullness of light didn't come, rays of light did come. And so Brendan said, our Jesus is already here, presumably because he saw Jesus in their humility, in their hospitality, in their care for creation, and then in their welcome for foreigners. And so, with wonderful humility, he sailed all the way back to Ireland. Well, it's a wonderful story. And well, Tom said, and by the way, when I visited him, America was extremely polarized, as it still is. USA was extremely polarized, and is Europe increasingly becoming. And I never, ever expressed a point of view, but I did ask one or two questions, which I was shouted out for asking. But what I found was that one felt that the American dream, which the world thinks of as the opportunity for anyone to go from rags to riches, to climb up a ladder, to become very wealthy. But of course, you push others down when you're climbing up the ladder. And it's getting rich at the expense of creation and at the expense of those who are not recognized, to use a phrase that perhaps is inaccurate, as white supremacists. And so he felt that we need a new American dream because the old American dream is coming to an end. Now, we are called to a way of life. We are called to a way of life that has got to transform the third millennium. And the Chinese leader said the other day that he thought autocracy would win over democracy because you can get everything organized in a harmonious and uniform way and can be much more efficient. Winston Churchill said democracy is the worst of all systems, except for all the others. And the question is democracy coming to the end of its life? We don't know. It may very well be. Many people in autocracies think it is. It can't survive. But there are huge nuclear threats. I've had 70 years free of war. That is a major world war. And that is usually the time after which people forget. And it all happens over again. So I think we are confronting a possible new dark age with nuclear war, with calamitous climate catastrophes. We've been warned that, like the floods in this month, they will come, and they are but the harbinger of far worse things. So we could have 1 billion migrants coming from countries that can no longer exist, all because of our fossil fuel burning, which we're still doing day by day instead of stopping it tomorrow, and our hatred, our relentless pursuit of going up the ladder at the expense of creation. And the more I thought about Brendan, the more I realized that one reason why we in the community of Aidan and Hilda draw on Celtic is not to please Americans who have Scottish or Irish or Welsh roots. God forbid. No. It's nothing to do with that. It's because the Jesus movement started as a way. The first disciples were not known as Christians. They were known as followers of the way. And it all went wrong when the imperial Romans superimposed a colonial structure, and you had bishops and thrones and dioceses and popes and church councils called for by the state powers, told to form their creeds and get things sorted. And it became over-clericalized, and it was no longer a way of life. No wonder the Muslims carried on the 5 marks of the way of the followers of Jesus, the declaration of faith, giving alms to the poor, journeying on pilgrimage, fasting, and daily rhythm of prayer. And those are the things that we are seeking to recover for the followers of Jesus. And I went to Turkey. It was lovely to see the Muslims sitting in the streets praying. You couldn't find Christians doing it. They go into the church once a week. So I'm coming now back to Brendan. So Will Tom's vision was, we now need many Brendans. And he had discovered that in the community of Aidan and Hilda, when we take our first vows or our life vows, we call it taking the voyage. And we read from the voyage of Brendan. And we say that we are willing to abandon ourselves, to let the wind of God blow us, whether in wild or windy or well-worn places. But we abandon ourselves to the next wave that comes, for better or worse, till death do us part. It's a wonderful image. Somebody in Australia doesn't like us being called voyagers because she says only the colonialists came on boats, and it's a large country and they don't have boats. But I said, well, actually, the Aboriginals came on boats originally. People have voyages to the moon, and the Worldwide Catholic Church calls baptism the journey, because you're immersed in water and it's a lifelong journey through water, as it so to speak. And so we call it taking the voyage. And so Will Tom wondered whether this new monastic movement could be the new American dream. So instead of trying to get to the top of the ladder, we journey at the bottom, as it were, at sea level, which is dangerous, and it doesn't guard us from all sorts of dangers, but it's also very adventurous and full of fun. And we meet all sorts of new people. Well, I couldn't get rid of this dream. And by the way, it was lovely to go to the nearby town, and I've just forgotten, and to meet. Where's he gone? He's disappeared. Oh, Steve. Yes, right. Steve is here to meet with Steve Robinson.
That was Flagstaff, Arizona, Ray.
But it was only 10 kilometers away or something, wasn't it? Anyway, it was lovely to meet you there. And I began to realize that the reason we study the Celtic saints is because they were the Acts of the Apostles, Volume 2. The Acts of the Apostles tells the story of the followers of Jesus' way amongst Jews, and then amongst Greek-speaking people. But they were all within the Roman Empire, and then the Acts of the Apostles stops. Acts of the Apostles, Volume 2, as I call it, is the stories of how the way of Jesus spread outside the Roman Empire to Ireland and to Britain, which was outside from 410 AD onwards. And there it took root in indigenous ways. And indeed, the Council of Ephesus of 430 something decreed that people outside the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, was in charge of the Western Church in the Empire, but those countries outside the Empire could follow their own patterns. And therefore, the people in Ireland and Britain were free by the worldwide church to follow their own patterns. They had to follow the way of ordinations and so on, but they did follow their own patterns. And so we see a glimpse of the way of Jesus in indigenous patterns, in tribal patterns, in several countries. Of course, they were sinners just like the rest of us, but they were God intoxicated. Somebody has called them God intoxicated. And they became a nation of saints and scholars. They developed spiritual foster mothers, although it was a patriarchal age and all the texts were written by men. Nevertheless, in Ireland, they made room for St. Bridget, who was the mother of the people, and they had the spiritual foster mothers to whom the boys of chieftains were sent to be educated. And as they became followers of Jesus, these spiritual foster mothers became absolute linchpins of the people. But the whole point of studying this is not of misplaced patriotism or looking backwards. It is so that we can see an alternative to what I call colonial Christianity. And when we look through Christianity through this lens, we do see the possibility of a new American dream. Now, I'm a complete fool, of course, because I'm just a pilgrim and I talk to people, but I learned about the doctrine of manifest destiny, which the awful English and others from Europe invented, from Spain as well, which was that it was the manifest destiny of people who were getting rid of the awful kings in Europe and coming to a new land, to be like Israel, starting a new nation. And if there were people like Canaanites, the indigenous people, they were a problem, but you dealt with them and kept them in their place. And if they got nasty, you killed them. So you had cowboys and Indians, which filmed the films Saturday morning cinema of my boyhood. And many people who came to America came as immigrants from Ireland. As President Biden has said, the Israelis treat the Palestinians as badly as the English treated the Irish. And so many Irish had to leave, to go to America, as did many Scots and indeed many English and Welsh too, and French and Spanish. And so it was a new world, and they had wars between themselves, and you all know the history. And a new country was eventually set up. But one of the things that has come with it is not only the idea of manifest destiny, which is that Americans can behave as if they are Israel and disregard those who can be regarded as Canaanites, but unwritten very often was white supremacy. And so in the Constitution, which had elements of the English Magna Carta, which said boo to the king, and other elements from the French Revolution of Thomas Paine, there was the freedom of all men. And this freedom of all men did not include women, did not include black or indigenous people, it included white men. But you could say it was an improvement on what went before. However, as time has gone on, materialism has become the real God, but we do it in the name of Christ. And I am very this is not only the USA, it's spreading through Europe. I was in Norway a few months ago with a youth with a mission prayer weekend, and there's a passionate new nationalism in Norway, which is being harnessed to the charismatic and evangelical prayer movements, so that Norway will be a nation under God, but there is a frightful need to come to the way of Jesus to distinguish the colonial constructs which have imprisoned Christianity. The pride, which is the first thing in the human heart, which the Desert Fathers spent their lives getting rid of from their hearts. And the prejudice, which we are all prisoners of. We all have constructs. Everybody in the world has constructs. But Jesus calls us to go beyond the constructs of our imprisoning ideologies and follow him, and he reveals himself to every people. And so the issue is not whether we're right or left in politics, or whether we're right or left in Christian morality, or what's this, that, or the other. The question is whether we're straight. The question is whether we follow Jesus so that we get rid of from our hearts all that creates confusion and clutter. The question is whether we purify our hearts so that we are pure in motive and not pushing into our Christianity constructs of our churches or our upbringing, which are basically a power struggle in the guise of Christ. The question is whether we are committed to obedience, which is to be obedient to that which is of God in every human being. So if we are obedient to that which is of God in every human being, it takes the axe to racism, to sexism, to ageism, to everyism. Because everybody has something of the image of God they're made in. So the book suggests, it tells something about our vows and how we make it a voyage with Brendan. And it calls on the indigenous peoples who have very different ways of expressing their spirituality, but have deep insights into the divine in creation, deep hospitality towards other people very often, and some knowledge of a good voice and a bad voice in their hearts, of good and evil, in other words. So although we're not going to accept the white man's God, which is money dressed up as Jesus, they may very well accept the wonderful way of the Jesus who comes in different names. And only last week, IVP sent me a wonderful book. It's the New Testament. It's the First Nations translation of the New Testament. There are many, many different names for God. Different tribes in the Old Testament have 100 different names for the divine. And in First Nations, there are 100 different names for the divine and for Jesus. But in this translation, the word for gospel is the good road. What a wonderful analogy of the gospel. And it resonates so much with us who follow a way of life. But then I was sent a few days later, so somebody's obviously been in contact. And this book, called Destiny Denied and Restored, it's Healing the Land. Ross Parker, one of the founders of our community, writes an endorsement of it. And it's investigating the historic impact of Euro-Americans on Native American peoples. It includes a whole chapter about how the English mistreated the Irish and how the Scots, because of their covenant theology through John Calvin, thought it was okay to evict Catholics from their own land and to treat them as scum, which is part of the problem in Northern Ireland today. And many of the people from Northern Ireland, Scotch-Irish, Scotch-British, went to America with importing that concept that it's okay because we're doing it in the name of God. So this is part of the birthright of the community of Aidan and Hilda, which we call healing the land, healing the wounds of history, healing the jaundiced cultural mindsets which we adopt in the name of Christ, having the humility to divest ourselves of all this and to journey with nothing but Jesus in the boat. So there is a whole stirring going on. And it was, I think, President John F. Kennedy who said America will never find its destiny until it studies its First Nation peoples and does right by them. And I think it was Billy Graham who said the world will only be evangelized, or may be evangelized, through the First Nation peoples of the USA accepting the gospel and following the way. So I believe we are at a very critical stage in human history. It's very urgent. And one reason why people like Melanie Klein, who's written best-selling books on the environment, are taken notice of. And she says the Christians have no theology for a creation-friendly world, so she dismisses them. But she does say that the First Nations have a spirituality that does honor the natural world. I think she's wrong about Christianity, but most people don't know that because they haven't heard of us and people like us and of cultic spirituality, which actually wants us to restore communion between God and creation and restore communion between God and all people, not in a colonial way, but in the servant spirit of Jesus. So please forgive the ramblings of an old man and tell me, crucify me if you like, or ask questions because we've now got time for discussion. And remember Columba's rule, forgiveness from the heart towards all. So we can agree or disagree, but we can have forgiveness in our hearts towards all and learn from one another and journey together. So it's over to you now for questions and discussions.
Ray, it's your connection with the First Nation that I'd like to inquire about. There's a daily message from this organization, White Bison, and it's a quote by one quote by a Native American elder. And as I read these things, I am absolutely struck dumb by how closely it parallels what we believe, and more importantly, what the Bible actually means. It seems like the Native American spirituality is at many times is an alternative way of speaking the Bible. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the first chapter of my book talks about 100 different names for God in the Bible, and then goes into the First Nations who have many different names for the Creator and for Jesus. I don't think we should be starry-eyed or naive. Some of the First Nations people themselves in their spiritual tradition talk about the devil person. They talk about two voices inside, good and bad. So I think they are as aware as we Christians that there is good and bad, and therefore not everything in First Nations is good. And of course, I've only met, most of the ones I met in the US are in reservations who have been ruined by drug addiction and abuse and this, that, and the other, because it's a wholly unnatural way to live. So I don't think we should be naive. I think we need Jesus, whatever name we know him by, to come and help us and pull us out of our holes that we're in, because we're in holes and they're in holes, many of them.
I related to everything you said. I thought it was wonderful, and the 100 names for God, like you just mentioned. And I found in some of my nonpartisan and community and political work that the young people in 20s and 30s, especially, they're mostly drawn to the climate change, to environmental movement. And everything you said would certainly be embraced by them because it's very general. And the divine spirit and the indigenous, and then, Christianity, take it or leave it, but there's 100 ways to say God. So that to get the word out to those people of that age would be something that I'm going to think about.
Wonderful. God bless you. And that's a great example from one of the guardians.
Ray, you talked about a first a gospel for the First Nations people, a book that you were sent by IVP. What was the name of that?
Oh, my memory's going in old age. I'll have to go downstairs and get it. It's published by IVP.
It's the First Nations version of the New Testament.
That's it. Yeah. The First Nations version of the New Testament.
Terry Wildman is the lead on the production team for that.
It's absolutely so refreshing. It can refresh our faith as well as theirs.
One thing that I've noticed is that Ray, you were saying that yes, the Gospels and Christianity has very strong messages about the environment, and it really does. But you look at the American church, and it doesn't matter if it's the Western Latin Church and its offshoots in the evangelical world, or the Eastern Greek Church. At least in the United States, they've all pretty much joined the Church of the American Dream. But you go back to the early church fathers, you go back to just even the early church post-Constantine, and many of them were still writing quite strongly about the connection between all of creation, which includes humanity as well as, everything else, and God. And this, of course, is also expanded upon in Eurygena, but it is an area that has been pretty much forgotten by the church in total.
Well, I recommended in Norway that people pray by being immersed in water as a hypocrite, and they told me to dive into the fjord the next morning at 8 o'clock, and I've never repeated that recommendation ever since. But it is true that a lot of the Celtic Christians prayed immersed in waters, and the reason they did it was because this idea that we're embodying the created world as we're immersed in the water, and we're praying that God will transform the elements as well as humans. It's a great. Thank you for that, Michael. Yeah, thank you.
Ray, if I could, first of all, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And I think what you say is right on point, especially with what we're seeing down here in Texas. It is the great state of Texas, but like every other place, we have our problems. I think one of the issues that I see that I'm confronted with American style Christianity is the abandonment of general revelation, the revelation that nature gives to us about God. And I think that has occurred because of our Reformed history and the primacy and the concept of an inerrant Bible. And I think what we've run into, or at least what I've encountered myself in doing the work that I do, is that because churches have become so hyper-focused on the literal words of the Bible that we've forgotten that God is in the river, God is in the sticks, God is in the trees, God is all around us. God cannot be contained by a book. And I can only see that from the American lens, because I don't live in Europe. But are you seeing that other places? Are we running into that problem worldwide, or is that just an American issue?
Thank you, John. Those beautiful words. I think that Europe, the church is dying, but nationalism is hugely increasing, and in some countries, the Christian movement is being linked to revival of nationalism, which is quite similar to what you're experiencing in Texas. So it wipes out natural revelation, and it also subverts the Bible, because our way of life calls us to repent of the schisms. Now, the schism of the Reformation, many here are Reformed Christians, if we want to call ourselves that. But we have to say what was right and what was wrong. And we threw out the connection of Almighty God with his presence in the creation, but his presence in society. So economics became a matter of money, and the New Testament said, don't make money your God. And you do it in the name of Christ, because he wants you to be successful, use your talents and so on. And completely missing out that the Ten Commandments was the basis for a civilized society in the Old Testament. And the Judeo-Christian teaching has been the foundation of societies that have put justice at its heart. They've not divorced justice from Jesus. They've not divorced creation from Jesus. They've not divorced the whole of life from human community from Jesus. And two young men who are both inventing a lot of new clean energy things in Edinburgh. They're quite academics. But they've cycled a long way and wanted to film me on Lindisfarne, because they both go to what you might, I don't know what you call it, right-wing evangelical churches, I don't know what the name for it is, who teach that we're all going to hell. The only thing a Christian should do is to save people through Jesus so they can go to heaven. And to waste all this time on the creation is an absolute waste of time and is rubbish. So they came to film me because they come across this movement of Christians who didn't believe that was the answer. And so I, talked to them. It's actually very bad theology. It is not biblical theology. It is theology through the prism of colonialism. And I said to them that the people who didn't want Jesus to go to Jerusalem were the fanatical Christians. They wanted Christ to be the Christ who ruled physically from Jerusalem and had a kingdom of supremacy where everything was successful, and he was the top dog. So they couldn't bear the idea of failure. They couldn't bear the idea of the Lamb of God being full of defenseless love. They couldn't bear the idea, to put it in later terms, of a cross with a circle in it, which encompasses all people and all creation. No, they wanted the cross to be a sword. And through the last 2,000 years, over half of Christianity has been about sword, colonial, capitalism, unredeemed capitalism, I mean. And so that's the issue. And I think that we are being called by God to be a prophetic way, which is an alternative to this nationalism dressed up as Christianity.
Time to inject a note of hope here, perhaps. I mean, yes, we are. I love Simon Reed's phrase that we are a small community with an impossibly huge dream. And Ray, you've outlined that dream wonderfully well for us. I also want to say that it's kind of like the days of Elijah, when Elijah felt he was completely on his own and got told, no, there are 7,000 others who haven't bowed their knees to Baal. And as we share this message and try to live this way, we find that there are others. Richard Rohr and those who follow him are an example. there are those who are drawn to this sort of Christianity. And I think Elizabeth Young was right when she said that a lot of the people in their 20s and 30s are drawn not to church as they have known it, but to the creation care and a God who cares for creation.
Absolutely. I was in a retreat house in Norway a few months ago, was just leaving, and a young woman left the poetry class she was in or something to talk to me, and she said, my church, that was the Church of Norway, Lutheran Church, says I should stop wasting my time with Extinction Rebellion. It's not what church people should do. She said, Extinction Rebellion tells me I should leave the church. It's a waste of time because they're not interested in creation. What should I do? Well, I was just leaving, so I said, you should read my book, Celtic Climate Crisis. But it's a cry that many young people have.
Yes.
And we have many allies amongst young people. And many young people are interested in spirituality, even if they don't join a church as they see it. The Mennonites in Canada are doing a wonderful work with Indigenous people. So many people are, so we mustn't kid ourselves that we're that tiny minority.
Lynn.
Hi, Ray. Hold on. I'm on a new device and I'm trying to figure out how to use it this morning. So, hi, Ray. Thank you so much.
Hi.
I sent you an email on your birthday. I don't know if you remember me. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for this talk, and myself and several others in the U.S. community are really interested in how to reach the younger generations, how Celtic Christianity and spirituality is relevant to their lives. And you know, I was a cultural anthropology major in undergrad. I took Native American literature as one of my courses. And the professor was a Taos Pueblo woman who said to me, you need to stop studying our people and study your own people. That was 30 years ago. I took that to heart, and I did start learning about my own Celtic ancestry, although my family is like third generation Californian. And it's a bit rambling, but my point is that I follow a lot of Indigenous leaders on social media, and there is sort of an anger that's a righteous anger towards white people. And kind of a stay away. We don't want you. We don't trust you. We're decolonizing. And I guess I'm just wondering how to go about reaching younger generations and bridging that gap. Where do we start?
That is a very good question. When I was with the Hopi people, they're great runners. They ran 113 miles when the railways came through, 30 miles away and back again to see the railway. But one young man came for prayer because he was doing his first rodeo, which kind of marked his manhood. And we went along. I always boycotted rodeos on principle throughout my life. I set that aside in order to support him doing his first rodeo. And he fell off the horse after about 90 seconds, which was quite an achievement. He used to stay on it for 90 seconds. And I realized that nothing is simple. He felt the rodeo was, but he'd also come and ask Christians to pray for him. And I think it's very, very important that there were Christians to pray for him. And when I was at a gathering, there was a woman who sat at the back who didn't say a word, and there was a charismatic white American who wanted us to pray for the sick, and we had charismatic prayer over a lot of people. It went on for a long time. I was involved in it. All sat there all the time. And at the very end, when I was just about to leave, I have waited for you. She said nothing. She said not one word. She turned out to be an elder. The purpose of an elder is to watch and wait. They're not appointed, they emerge. People sense that they are people of wisdom, integrity, who are just there. Their being is more important than the name tags. And she said, you've come an awful long way to be amongst us. There must be something worthwhile here, she said. She was, precisely. But she'd observed, she'd noticed. I just felt that was the Holy Spirit. That wonderful woman touching me through the elder. I could learn to watch and wait like that. Be a privileged person. That's your question, but I think we've got to look out for the Spirit in each situation. There aren't any blueprints. And okay, she's with a people who are in an artificial reservation with a lot of problems, drugs and so on. The ones who survived have intermarried and become assimilated, which was, for a time, US policy was assimilation. And it went back to reservations. There's no easy answers. Love is the answer. Love, availability, being present, and allowing the Holy Spirit to lead us. And the Holy Spirit is better than any politician to lead us into the fresh ways.
That's where our eighth waymark comes in, I think, that, to listen to the Spirit, and we don't give it enough of a time. Ray, your microphone has not been perfect through the talk, but the connection is pretty poor at the moment. If you could jiggle the wires or whatever you need to do, but if you can.
I'm hopeless at IT. I don't know what.
Thank you, though. I got most of it. Thank you so much, Ray.
I'm very sorry.
No, we got
Pardon?
We got most. Next question.
Well, I wanted to make a comment. I really have been noticing what younger people's response to the church is kind of like, I don't want to fight with you all the time. It seems like there's a real emphasis on our differences and the things we don't agree about. And so that's where I think our ecumenism comes into the conversation, because we don't all have to have the same perspective, agree about, for example, what we think about scripture or what we think about the church or the interpretation of something. Our emphasis is on unity and community. And I think that is one thing the church is going to have to turn its back on, is hating each other, before we're going to attract young people who just don't feel like they have time for that. They don't have time for that. They know that the earth is burning up, and that's, as the godmother to 4 atheists, that's really the thing that I think about a lot, the most.
Thank you very much, Esther Marie. It's so lovely to see you again. I totally agree with you. And of course, our way of life commits us to weave together the God-given strands of Christianity that have become separated. It's up to each of us to try and discern what, if we're Protestants, what we think is God-given in the Catholic strand. If we're Orthodox, what is God-given in the Protestant strand, and so on. But we also need to ask what is God-given in the strand of First Nation spirituality, and weave it together. We can't impose it, but we can weave. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, that God is creating a tapestry that is more glorious than any imposed uniformity can ever be. And so we're very privileged people. We're being called to weave.
Ray, hello, and thank you so much. Emily from Texas.
Hello.
Hello. The watch and wait, those two words, really hit me in the soul. I believe we spend too much time sometimes in thought, conversation, thinking, how do we respond and all this, but this listening, we need to listen to others and how they approach the world, how they see through their eyes, and listen and let others speak, especially people we don't agree with, and be praying and listening to the Spirit, listening to them. I think we get so caught up in words, ideals, this, that, and the other, that we ignore that we are created by God in God's image, that we are created as human beings, but our world, says we're human doings. We always have to be thinking, doing, processing, and all this. And I think basically for me, it's been to return to silence, to watching, to waiting, to being in communion with who I am and whose I am, and spend that time as coming forth from our spiritual spring of our creation and why we are on this earth at this time, which is a difficult time, but yet we are here for a reason, and that is to be God's people on this earth in so many different and varied and beautiful and unusual and sometimes uncomfortable ways. Thank you, Ray. God bless you. You are such an inspiration to our community and to the world.
Thank you, Emily. You are such an inspiration. And you reminded me that the Democrats said all Republicans are godless, and the Republicans said all Democrats are godless when I was in the States last time. And I thought, well, we are committed to obey that which is of God in every human being, because the Bible teaches that each human being is made in the likeness of God. So there is something of God, however deeply buried, in every single human being. And we've got to link on to that bit of the person. So thank you for reminding us of that. It was lovely to see Lisa in the Holy Island, Lindisfarne, last week. It's nice to see you again. I hope you had a good journey back.
I did. Thank you, Ray. It was a pleasure meeting you, spending time. As we talked about telling stories, I think that's the key in the next generation. We need to hear their stories, and not just what's happening to them as a generation, but individually, what they're discerning, they're searching, they're looking for something. If we will listen and respect their stories, then they will be able to hear the story of Christ, because they will come to respect also our stories. But first, we need to make that invitation to listen.
Thank you.
I will only unmute long enough, Ray, to tell you it's such a joy to see you again. And thank you so much for doing this today.
Well, thank you for all you're doing, Steve. You keep reviewing all these books.
Same here, Ray. Thank you very much. It's so good to see you again.
And for me also, and my son Dowell has sent his regard. He's at work.
Well, give my regards to Dale and say I want to see him again before I depart this life.
Thank you. I will tell him that. He'll be very pleased. You know, we're talking about listening, and I think we've come to not want diversity. And to me, diversity is God. And I think we have to relish diversity in our life, in our thinking, and then filter that with the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Wonderful.
You know, on that listening, Lisa, you were getting close to something that's near and dear to my heart. You know, the all too often, and this is more an American phenomenon. I think people listen to respond; they don't listen to learn.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's that whole thing. You know, it goes back to human doings. You know, we've got to we've got to be in this constant motion. We've got to be ready to respond versus ready to sit and think.
Ray, thank you, Ray, for reflecting a bit on the early days of this community in the U.S. and some of the adventures we had in British Columbia and other places. I have a question, though, for you. So inviting your reflection on something that seems to be parallel with other developments we've talked about. I'm hearing garbled audio. Are the rest of you hearing that too? Or am I clear?
You're clear.
Clear. Okay. Then it's just my end here. We've talked for a couple of decades about the emergent church, trying to figure out what that's all about. I'd like to think that our community has been on the front edge of that, intentionally or otherwise, in terms of the neo-monastic strand of that. But some are saying, and I'm inclined to think it's worthy of discussion, that we have been pushed by the COVID era across the line into becoming the emergent church, whether we want to or not. Don't ever not be a community again that is both virtually and electronically connected, for instance. And we've been doing that for some time. But I think that it's hard to imagine the whole of it as the work of the Holy Spirit and all of this. But what do you think about that? Do you want to comment on that, Ray?
I wrestle every day with how to reach the 20 to 35 age group. I have a young man who rings me, a very able civil servant in London, who says Lindisfarne is the spiritual capital of England. He's a pagan, but he's passionate about spirituality. And for him, cosmic consciousness is the ideal, and sex is a very important part of that. But I'm not sure that all the women he has sex with would agree that they've been treated with the most beautiful attitude. And so he doesn't like Christianity because it makes exclusive claims. But is he facing up to what old-fashioned people like me call right and wrong? This is the sort of discussions we have. And I think that we have to learn from young people that the idea of the cosmic consciousness or universal spirituality should not be poo-pooed, but we also need to journey with them so that they can actually be real about the fact that human nature is very selfish. And human societies tend to be very selfish. And religions that just have ideals without the power to change that selfishness don't have the total answer. Which brings us back to Jesus, I suppose. So I think we have something unique, and we must never give that up.
Yeah, I want to agree with something that came out of what Tom just said, which is whether we are starting to transition from being a community to being, in some sense, a church, whatever that might look like. I was actually discussing that with my soul friend yesterday. That's Graham Booth, UK Guardian. And I think I had seen that as happening sometime in the future, possibly. But I think enough people are now leaving the church as we have known it, and some of them are finding their way into our community. And for myself, this community is my main spiritual home, and over the years I've come to belong to a church basically to support my wife. Now, when she retires from pastorate next year, whether I will join an active church, I do not know. But there are a number of us now in both countries for whom this community is their main spiritual home, and they have not much or no time for the church as we have known it.
Mm-hmm. I think in Britain we're much worse than you. The leadership of the Church of England, it's declining so fast that their training of all the new young clergy is to make them brilliant managers, because they'll have so many church buildings to manage, church councils to manage, church services to manage, and church things to manage, that they won't ever have time for people. They'll be very good managers, so it'll be all admirals and no navy. Well, but I think God is moving the church from being an institution to being a movement. Mm-hmm. The original followers of Jesus were a movement. They were followers of the way. We are a movement. Don't let us ever become a church. That would be criminal. We are the followers of the way. But whether your leads you to join a local institution called a church is up to you. We have tended to encourage people to do that. But as you say, the nature of faith communities is changing in our age.
Paul, jumping off something that you just said about the regular church, here in St. Paul, there's a small church that mounts a Celtic contemplative service that is quite well attended, and one of the comments, and one of the most frequent comments you hear about people there is that I love it so much because it's not churchy, and it's not churchy, but we have so many of the elements. We share communion. We share the Lord's Prayer. But there's a time for people to get together, just hear thought-provoking words, and sing some truth that is simple but is repeated so often that it becomes you. So that's as close to home church as I have, but so many people go there because it isn't church, even though it's in a church.
It's 11:25, and we said we'd let Ray go at 11:30 because I know you have another meeting at 6 your time, 12 hours. So if anybody who has not said anything so far got a reflection or question to make, and then after a minute for that, we'll ask Ray to close up the meeting in prayer, if you would.
Okay, shall I pray?
Please.
Holy Three, Earther, Brother, Breather, you call us into the communion of loves, ceaselessly flowing. You call us at a time in the world's story of great change. Some of us are frightened, some of us are puzzled, some of us are excited. Come to us as we are and reveal yourself to us, that we may be followers of the way, and knowing Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. May we not be despairing over what we do not understand.